Hey there, Chad here. This is Kerbal Space Program in 2022, and this is part 2 of my 3-part episode on getting a probe to Eve. We'll go ahead and pick back up where we left off. Hope you enjoy it. One thing I want to do is we'll do a quick demonstration here. So we want to move into Eve. This is Eve here. And there's a couple of things to know. The reason we waited until that window was at 20 days to get the best transfer over to the Eve's orbit from Kerbin, you want to be about 54 degrees ahead of Eve. So the angle being a line that runs from Eve to the sun, a line that runs from Kerbin to the sun, and we're talking about the angle between those. Technically it's called negative 54 degrees because Eve is behind where we're starting. Okay, now how do I get that angle? You look it up on the website. There is a way to calculate it. I do not know what those calculations are. I'm not going to even pretend to know how to do that, and it's information that I can look up and grab. So 54 degrees is what we're looking for there. What else do we want to know about this? Yes, when you go to bodies that are inside of your orbit, you tend to want, so Eve being closer to the sun than Kerbin, we want our orbit to effectively kind of cut in and be shallow and effectively match Eve's orbit eventually, right? So what we will do is we're going to have to burn in a little bit. So what I will initially start by doing is we will create an orbit that kind of shoots out this way until we leave the sphere of influence of Kerbin. The best way to do that is to start the launch when we are at midnight, basically, because when it's midnight, as we accelerate prograde, our orbit will grow this direction, and eventually it would lead out there, and we will ultimately be closer to the sun when we're at periapsis. Now, in testing this and trying to come up with the easiest way to do this for the first time, if you've never done it, what I've learned is actually waiting until you're at about maybe 4 o'clock here. So I guess if this were midnight, probably talking about like 3 o'clock in the morning or so, maybe 4 o'clock in the morning, so that our orbit heads out this way, and it will be kind of at an angle, so we're not going straight in towards the sun, but at a bit of an angle, maybe 45 degrees. And what I found is that becomes easier in a few ways. Now, it's not as efficient, but it becomes easier because we won't run into a problem when we go to create a node to intercept Eve where we re-intercept Kerbin. If we re-intercept Kerbin, because we're flying around out here, and then we're going to change our vector and trajectory, if we fall back into Kerbin's sphere of influence, we get an intercept there, and that messes up seeing what the intercept looks like for Eve. So when I initially did this the first couple of times, I tried doing this thing where I just launch, straight out. When I would go to make the transfer to Eve, I would get messed up. It would hit Kerbin. A couple of times I actually slammed into the planet, and I was kind of trying to figure out why that was happening, and then it occurred to me, well, because it doesn't care where the planet is when I'm measuring a trajectory to here. It's not paying attention to that. I have to pay attention to it. So in order to combat that, what I'm going to do is fast forward time until, with respect to the day-night line here, the site, the Kerbal Space Center is right about here. That's what I'm going to do here. So we'll fast forward. I lost track of it there. Sorry about that. It's not anywhere near where I thought it was. So we're at noon. Now we're at about 6 p.m. Now we're at midnight, and I'm going to kill it. I'm going to go a little further than that, right there. That's maybe even a little too much, but that'll get her done. This gets us close enough to what I want to do. Again, this is not an ideal trajectory. We're going to use extra fuel to do this, but I think it's simpler for the first time you're trying to make this happen. Okay, part 2 to this. I had mentioned that this rocket has a tremendous amount of thrust. It has so much thrust that I'm actually only going to throttle this up to about 40%, which is right about there. As we launch, I want to maintain a thrust-to-weight ratio of about 1.5 to 1, and that's for stability reasons. If I let it go full throttle, it will eventually lose control because of the friction with the atmosphere, and I don't want to mess with that. Good to go. Okay, as I get to 60 meters per second, I'm going to nose the rocket over about 10 degrees to start getting some horizontal or lateral speed going. That'll do it. And then I'm going to monitor thrust to weight. I want to keep this at about 1.5. And really it's just a matter of, as it climbs up to 1.6, I'm going to tap the throttle down to drop it back down. I'm going to continue to do that until we're to about 15,000 meters. And then at that point, we will just let it go. So we're back up to 1.6, quick tap. And this is to keep the rocket stable as it's going through the densest part of the atmosphere. So far, so good. It's looking nice and steady. That last tap had kind of overdone it a little bit, so we're just going to let it go at this point, and I'm going to start to nose it over to about 30 degrees. And then as the fuel runs out, what I will do is throttle the center engine up all the way, and then I'll cut these loose. We'll see those go out here in about 5 seconds or so. Full throttle, and cut them loose, and we are clear. And then I'm going to just set the rocket over on its side, very gently. I think we're otherwise in good shape with this one. It actually is fairly stable. I really didn't have to fly it much. I just had to be gentle with it. It is drifting a little bit here and there. I'm not quite sure why. Okay, our APO is climbing. We will be in space here shortly. We're just going to let that run. Engine will eventually run out. What we'll see is as this goes, and it'll probably quit before it makes it really noticeable, and we'll have to stage and use the next engine, but we should see this kind of start to bulge out this way as we go. Kind of see that starting to happen, but we are out of fuel, and there it goes. So we'll destage that, go with the next one, and just continue the process. I'm going to actually go ahead and tell it to lock in on prograde at this point. Also, we are at the space level now, so I'm going to go ahead and hit 9, and that's going to eject this. There it goes. And then I'm also, because we don't have any wind resistance, we're going to go ahead and hit 1, and that action group opens the communication, and we should see the solar panels coming out there. Sorry for the lighting on this. I need to work on that a little bit. But if we come over here, now we're seeing that bulge I was talking about. I wonder if we're going to end up getting a moon or encounter here. I hope not, but it almost looks like we certainly will. We'll just have to deal with that. And there it is, and we'll kill that there. Let it go a little longer. There we go. Okay. I think we're going to be good. Okay, so step 1 is done. That is the original, or initial orbit, the initial burn to get us into an orbit around Kerbal and out of the sphere of influence of Kerbin. So we're about 5 days from that. I'm going to go ahead and fast forward time. And when we leave the sphere of influence of Kerbin, the time acceleration or time warp will drop back to 50, which is good. So I'm going to go ahead and go up to 10,000, and I really don't need to worry about it. It'll kill it on its own. Now what you'll notice although it's not going to be overly perceptible. In there we just drop back to 50. So we don't see a big difference here, but as we do our next step, we're going to see Eve start to catch up. And our satellite, we're going to set it up so its orbit starts to curl in a little bit. And the goal is that they'll intersect right around, I guess maybe in this area here. That's what we're kind of aiming for. And then we will have an intercept with Eve, and that will be our flyby, and we'll turn that into an orbit. Now, one thing I mentioned earlier is I left some space here for Astrogator. From what Astrogator said, I left some space on how much time we had until we had to do a burn to get the maximum effect of a burn. And the reason I did that is I knew it would take several days to get into the orbit around Kerbin. And again, this is not the most efficient way to do this. You can set up an orbit or a burn from, well, frankly, from launch that is a one and done, and it will get you there, and it can get you there extremely efficiently. I'm just not good at that. So I do it in stages. First stage, get out of Kerbin's sphere of influence. I'm now in sphere of influence around the sun. And next we're going to find a spot on here a few days out, not a year out. That's not what I want. Yeah, I'm not sure why that's showing up as such. Oh, you know what would be a really good idea is to go ahead and set Eve as the target. So that'll help a lot. And we're going to come in here and we're going to click here. Why are these so... I know what it is. Yep, I had not completely stopped the time warp. It was at 50 times still. So it was still moving forward, and that was kind of messing up with what I wanted it to do. So that's fine, no long-term problem there. We'll go ahead and set this out 2 days from now. That'll give me plenty of time. Hopefully we're not making this video for 2 days. Should give me plenty of time to create the maneuver that I want in order to get an intercept with Eve. Now, since we're going to be wanting to move from a slower orbit into or slower speed here to a faster one, this works just like trying to do a rendezvous around the planet. In this case, the sun is our planet, and we're trying to rendezvous with Eve. We are in a higher orbit, which means we're going slower, so we need to lower our orbit so that we'll match the speed of Eve somewhere over here. All right, to lower our orbit, I need to decelerate or go retro. And I'm going to drag this until that line crosses Eve's orbit, and then I get an intersect indicator. And there it is. Okay, so there's my closest approach right now. And that's 4 million kilometers. That's not going to do it for what we want to do. We're going to have to play with these a little bit and start by messing with this, and that's making it closer. And we'll have to go back and hit this one again. And they came back, and that's good. So let's do some drastic changes there. And that one looks really, really good. Actually, we got an intercept there, didn't we? Right there, we have an intercept. Okay, now a little bit ago, I made a big deal about talking about why when I launched, why I kind of did it at an angle instead of straight in. And this is why. If I don't have a secondary encounter with something else, by double-clicking on Eve here, I should see, and there it is, I see what that is going to look like if I execute it. So this is where the planet will be, and this is what our path will look like. That's in 125 days, but that's what it would look like after we complete this burn. So then what I can do, now that I can see this, I have a visual representation. I can come down here, and I can tell it to go to maneuver 1, and I can tell it to open the graphical maneuver editor, and I can start playing with my thrust on my node to get this to an orbit that I'm happy with. So the first thing I'm going to do is kind of raise this. Now, I think we've used this before, but in case you haven't seen it, this basically is the same as this guy, but it won't go away, and I can move around and I don't have to keep it on the screen. I can see what's going on. And then it has scale. So right now, every click on one of these is 10 seconds worth of thrust or whatnot, which is about a meter per second is what this is saying. But it represents seconds and meters per second of thrust. And so it'll move this eventual vector around, and I can scale it up to a whole lot, like 10,000, and I can scale it all the way down to 0.1. 1.0 is working pretty well for us. Let's go to 5 though. Just make this a little quicker then. We're going to click on this, and basically I'm just going to click these until I get it closer and closer and closer. Now right now I'm clicking the normal because I want to try to get this orbit lined up with the planet's plane. It's not going to be perfect, but I can get it closer, and that will help quite a bit. I'm going to call that good right there. And then we want to play with, that's the wrong way. We want to play with this, and I want to get it so that it's in a typical orbit, which is the other way. That would be this way around a planet. Okay, that's actually not so bad. When I say this way, it would be counterclockwise around the planet is what I really want to aim for. Now I'm going to turn the scale down so I can kind of get this dialed in a little bit better. And the atmosphere on Eve is about 90,000 meters, so I need to definitely stay above that. 160 isn't bad, but we can tighten that up a little bit more. 120. Let's go with 120. There is a secondary problem that we'll need to deal with in the future, but we don't need to worry about it right now. And that is that our probe does not have a person on it, so it has to have radio contact with Kerbin in order to be controllable. So right now our probe has full control, it has a great signal, and we have the ability to transmit data. When we're on the far side of a planet and there's no line of sight, we will lose the ability to control the probe. So we do need to be a little bit careful about that. As it stands right now, let's see, where's Kerbin? Don't really see it out there. That's probably it up there, I guess. The problem I would have right here is I would not have line of sight to Kerbin. So I would prefer to get this maybe over here if possible. But since that's not entirely possible, we're going to go ahead and go with what this is, and then when it's time to do a burn to circularize, we'll probably put it somewhere over here where there's still line of sight to Kerbin. So we'll have a slightly bigger orbit than what we're looking at right now, but all is well otherwise. We're going to go with this. Okay, that's everything regarding this orbit. We come out here and look at our ship, and everything looks fine. I probably... let's see if we're collecting electric. Yeah, it's not great, but it's getting something. We would really want the ship to fly with the panels, you know, pointing at the sun, because that would make the most sense. Ah, yes, I told it to go prograde, and I never turned that off, and so it's just doing its job. And this looks like a good place to stop this part of the episode, and we will pick it up in part 3. I hope you stick around to see the conclusion of this one. And as always, I thank you for your time this time, and until the next, fair travels.